So The Art of Fear is the chapter of The Rest is Noise where we look into the effect of Hitler and Stalin and those despotic regimes on classical music, which was enormous, cataclysmic, not only at the time, but the resonances afterwards. So if you think of the Nazi regime, for example, what happened to a whole generation of Jewish composers, many of whom ended up in camps and were murdered. There's a question what might have been. There's also the huge diaspora that happened. So many musicians, people such as Kurt Weill and Hindemith and Stravinsky and Korngold going to America, some of them, Kurt Weill ending up on Broadway, Korngold ending up in Hollywood, Schoenberg going to America, becoming a teacher in California. Also, how did composers such as Shostakovich and Prokofiev deal with living under that regime? Somebody once described them as dancers on a tightrope. Actually, this very fine balance between somehow surviving as an artist and keeping just on the right side and sometimes being on the wrong side of the regime and what that meant in the music. So we'll be looking into what that all means for music, but also looking around it. So we'll have talks about Russia in the 1930s and during the war. We'll have a talk about George Orwell and Animal Farm. We'll have Eric Levi talking about music in the Third Reich. We'll have Stephen Johnson talking about Shostakovich, Prokofiev and Stalin and what that all meant. We'll have somebody talking about what the symbol of the swastika means. We'll have a discussion of Leni Riefenstahl's films in the Nazi time. The concerts will look at all sorts of music which somehow was affected by these dark times, which either survived despite it all, or transcended it all in some ways, or reflected it. So you have Shostakovich's Leningrad Symphony, written at the height of the siege of Leningrad. You have Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time, which is a sort of ecstatic vision of the time hereafter, of the life hereafter. But the reason it was an ecstatic vision is that it was written in a prisoner of war camp in Silesia when he was suffering from extreme cold and extreme hunger. So these visions were partly brought on by that. And of course, that piece was performed by Messiaen and 3 other prisoners for an audience entirely of prisoners of war. And he said at the time he could never imagine a more intense audience for his music. We also have a concert of the music which was created in the Terezin, or sometimes known as Theresienstadt camp, which was a kind of showcase camp which the Nazis kept for the benefit of organizations such as the Red Cross. And they'd bring people in and say, look, we allow all these musicians to flourish, we allow them to sing opera and to play in string quartets. But in fact, the composers and the performers and the children who were in that camp were nearly all murdered. But some great music was created and performed, and composers such as Viktor Ullmann, who was a really wonderful composer, murdered at a very young age in Auschwitz after Theresienstadt. You wonder what might have been. So we're going to look at all of that. We're also going to be looking at what happened on the home front. So we have a really quite, in some ways, light-hearted concert by the BBC Concert Orchestra, which includes popular music, includes popular songs. It includes Adensell's Warsaw Concerto, which was a kind of classical crossover piece from the wartime, which was hugely popular at the time, and also William Walton's music for the film Henry V, Laurence Olivier's film Henry V, which was, of course, a great propaganda film from those times. We also look at Michael Tippett, who was a great British composer, a pacifist, a left-wing homosexual, and he wrote a piece just before, in 1939, just before the war started, called A Child of Our Time, a great big oratorio, really in the style of a Bach oratorio, which was inspired by the Kristallnacht, inspired by the story of a young man who was hounded by the Nazis. And instead of having, as you would in a Bach oratorio, having great big Lutheran chorales, you have those moments, those big collective congregational moments are in fact Negro spirituals, which was a highly unusual and quite daring step at that time.